because I remember taking a class with you last semester, and you talking about, actually, you mentioned this class too, that they took the map of the U.S., found the most white place, and they're like, this is how you ought to speak.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't quite like that, but
How
yeah. So like, I mean, I don't know if we can like tell a story, but when you look across the world, the accents that are considered standard in those countries are usually the accents that are associated with the largest economic power or the largest cultural center or just the largest city. So you think of Seoul, um, Korea, or Moscow, Russia, or Paris, or London, or all these capital cities are considered standard. There are a few exceptions. So like Brazil is an interesting case where it's not quite considered standard. I'm not sure what standard Brazilian Portuguese would be.
That's a very interesting, because they're not aware of it. It's like, this person has no regional trace. And I listened to that. I was like, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not like a hard and fast rule. I think Iceland is another case where the rural areas of Iceland are considered standard. But the United States, so we don't think of Washington D.C. as being standard American English. We don't think of New York City. I mean, California to some extent, but you can exaggerate and make fun of a California accent. In fact, they did in SNL. There's the sketch called The Californians. I think there were maybe 6 or so episodes of that. I mean, episodes. Um, and so California accent, like in an exaggerated way, isn't really considered standard either. So, where is considered, and so the reason why is, in the 1920s and 30s, when they started to have more mass media like radio and things, they needed to sort of have this broadcast standard because that's what they felt like was an important thing to do. And so they're like, well, we can't get people from New York because it's contaminated by all those Jews and all those Italians and all those Irish people. And we can't have anybody in the South because their English is contaminated by all those Afro-Americans. We can't have people from Chicago because they're contaminated by all these other. And so where do they go? They go to the whitest part of the country. They go to like the Midwest, and not just any kind of white, but it's like Anglo-Saxon white and like Scandinavian white. So you look at like the the Midwest is where the regional standard became the national standard. And it really comes down to Americans 100 years. I mean, it's not exactly gone now, but 100 years ago were super racist and super xenophobic, and they didn't want their language to be contaminated by all these outside influences. And so they chose the one they perceived to be the purest as far as ethnically, however they want to define that, and that's sort of what comes out of it now. So this all comes from a book called Race and the Rise of Standard American by, what if I forget their first name? Last name is Bonfiglio in 2002. Super good book. You kind of have to read the whole thing. It's an interesting writing style, but I think it's because of that, it has really made me rethink my relationship with standard American English. And I think once people start to realize maybe the racist undertones that come along with standard American English, maybe we can all start to rethink why we are promoting this, and maybe we could not think as highly of it as we once did.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting as you're describing kind of the parallels or the development of like kind of societal ways of thinking, societal norms together with language, and how those kind of went together. I hadn't really even considered that before, like a standardization of like printed text. Like there wouldn't have necessarily been a sense of like a standard spoken language. But it must be very like eye-opening for you to see kind of at this intersection of language and society, like what prejudices there are, what kinds of, and that a lot of things go unnoticed, I think, in the general population. But could you share some more insights about just kind of this, perhaps like the prejudices and injustices, things that you see at this intersection?
Yeah. So, I mean, something that I see is that people are very proud when they believe they don't have an accent. And like, yeah, well, I don't have an accent. And I talk about things like Utah English, and I have students like, well, I grew up in Tooele or Salt Lake or Provo, but I don't have a Utah accent. I'm like, so what's your accent then? Minnesota? Like, what? you by definition have a Utah accent if you're from Utah. Like, oh no, but Utah accent is what my grandparents speak because they grew up in Vernal or St. George or somewhere that's not here.
Interesting.
And so people are very proud when they believe they don't have an accent. Accents are things that other people have, but I don't have it. And so when you have this idea that accents are something that only uh, people that are less good than me. So like, oh, I have education and I'm smart and I'm, just the center of the universe. And people have this sort of, what's the word? Main character syndrome, where they think they're the best, and they see other people who sound different from them or use language in a different way from them. I think the first impression people might have is like, well, that's wrong. And so if you think that someone is just wrong, like, oh, why are they sounding that way? It's because they're just are they just too stupid to sound like me? I'm smart, of course, and so I was able to overcome these barriers of not sounding like that, but they're too dumb to fully understand. And I don't know if these are conscious thoughts that go through people's minds, but if someone who sounds relatively standard thinks less of someone because that person does not sound relatively standard, that's a pretty judgy thing to do.
Yeah.
I think nowadays in society, we know that we shouldn't judge other people based on their race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or religion or anything like that. But it's still really okay. Like society says it's okay to still judge people based on their grammar. This is sort of, I think people have called it like the last holdout of whatever discrimination. It's something like that. In a lot of like the diversity and inclusion statements you see that companies have or universities have, they say we don't judge people based on this. We have equal hiring things, and they always they list this handful of things and things that I never really considered, things like veteran status or pregnancy status. Things like, oh, okay, I probably shouldn't judge people on that, but they never include language. And so I'm not saying that not including it gives us license to judge people and to have prejudice based on that. But I think including it would be a really nice thing to do. Is like, oh, we should probably be aware that we shouldn't judge people based on their language or their language variety. So yeah, I think this mentality of standard English is the best, and therefore I'm good and you guys are not good is that's a very broad thing that happens. And I think, we could probably talk about more specific examples of how that's played out. But that idea, I think, is pretty pervasive, and I don't think it's a good idea to have.
Yeah, absolutely.